The story of the 60s starts with change. After the great season of 1964, Coach Darrell Fitz packed his whistle and headed back to Birmingham, leaving behind a team that was just starting to believe in itself. In his place came Coach Mack Wood, another sharp football mind, and one who knew how to build a program brick by brick. His first call was to a young assistant named Frank Cotton, a defensive coach with a teacher's heart and a lifetime of Bruton still ahead of him. By '68, times were shifting not just in Alabama, but everywhere. And in Bruton, the Tigers took the field with their first black players, young men whose courage and talent helped write a new chapter for T.R. Miller. What started the decade as one of the worst teams in the state would end it as champions. The 1969 Tigers, led by All-Staters Bucky Philippi, Jimmy McCracken, Steve Glass, and Frank Sims, were as tough as red clay and as steady as the train that runs through town. On a cold night in Bruton, they blanked Aliceville 27-0, and the whole town stood still. Because right then, under those lights, it wasn't just a win. It was the moment the T.R. Miller Tigers became a name the state would never forget. The 70s rolled into Bruton like a warm breeze through the pines, full of promise, full of pride. It was a decade that brought joy and heartbreak, great players, and even greater spirit. In 1972, a young coach named Larry Rampy came down from North Alabama with a new way of doing things. He preached strength, discipline, and hard work in the weight room, and by that fall, you could see the difference. The Tigers won 8 games and looked like a team on the rise. But fate can be cruel. In February of 1973, Coach Rampy was taken far too soon in a car accident. The loss cut deep through the locker room, through the town, through every man who'd ever worn the red and white. And then, as he so often would, Coach Frank Cotton stepped forward. He led that first team to a 10-2 record and a run to the state semifinals, not with schemes or speeches, but with heart. Under his watch, Miller football found its soul again, and in 8 seasons, his Tigers never once fell to kneel. By 1978, the red and white had taken on a shine all its own. Names like Dow Altman, Walter Broughton, and Walter Lewis, boys who would one day play on Sundays, were still just kids playing for their hometown. Back then, the whole town was Miller. You could feel it on Friday nights. That thump of the band, the roar from the stands, and the pride that made every young boy in Bruton dream of one thing: putting on that T.R. Miller jersey. The 1980s came to Bruton with a new kind of confidence, the kind that only comes from years of hard lessons and harder hits. It was a decade of success, of old names returning home, and of Friday nights that carried the weight of history. In 1981, former Tiger Mike Sasser came back to lead the program he once played for. He knew the field, he knew the people, and he knew exactly what that red and white meant. By '83, behind runners Mitch Lewis and Steve Lane, the Tigers had clawed their way to a 9-1 record, and the town could feel something building. Then came the 1984 season that would test every ounce of faith and toughness they had. Nobody saw it coming. A playoff run through the cold and the doubt, all the way to the state championship in Cherokee County. The wind was biting that night, breath hanging in the air like smoke. And late in the fourth quarter, with everything on the line, quarterback Kevin Ladnier dropped back and found James Weaver streaking down the field. Touchdown, 20-18. T.R. Miller, state champions once again. 2 years later, Sasser's Tigers made it back to the big stage. this time behind a ferocious defense led by Roger McClellan and the hard running of Joseph Williams. They brought home a runner-up trophy, and even in defeat, the pride never wavered. When Coach Sasser stepped away, Joel Williams took the reins, keeping the standard alive with 18 wins in 2 short seasons. By the end of the decade, something bigger was stirring in Brewton. The foundation laid, the fire still burning, and the stage was set for the greatest era of football T.R. Miller had ever known. By the time the 1990s rolled around, the fire in Brewton was burning bright again, and a familiar name was stepping back onto the field. Former Tiger Jamie Riggs had come home. He brought with him the same precision, the same pride, and the same quiet edge that defined him as a player. Under his hand, T.R. Miller football became something greater than a program, it became a standard. Across 10 unforgettable seasons, the Tigers won 117 games, more than any school in the state. 2 state titles in 91 and 94, 4 more trips to the finals, and enough memories to fill a century. But the 1990s weren't just about trophies. They were about rivalry, about those Friday nights when Brewton and East Brewton met under the lights and the whole world stopped to watch. In 1995, 2 unbeaten teams squared off, and the game didn't disappoint. With the season on the line, quarterback Scott Sasser found Sean Johnson in the end zone late in the 4th quarter. Tigers 18, Neal 14, and Brewton roared like a thunderstorm. A year later, fate flipped the script. Neal got the regular season win, but when the two met again in the semifinals, Miller walked into East Brewton and took it right back. And in 1997, battered, bruised, and counted out, the Tigers did it again. Behind quarterback Heath Hanks and a defense led by Carl McKinnish, Miller stunned an undefeated Neal team, 17-14. By the end of the decade, the TRM logo wasn't just a mark on a helmet, it was a promise. A promise that no matter who lined up across from them, the Tigers of T.R. Miller would play the game the right way, hard, proud, and with something deeper than talent. With heart. The 2000s came to Brewton with the weight of expectation, and somehow the Tigers carried it with ease. The 90s had been legendary, but the new decade, it was nearly as good, and maybe even sweeter in the way it surprised folks. In 2000, behind quarterback and kicker Pat Byrne and the punishing runs of Rayvon Howard, Miller went on one of the most memorable playoff runs in school history. Howard was a one-man storm, more than 1,000 yards in the postseason alone, and in Birmingham, under the bright lights, he ran for 278 yards in the title game against Fayette County. When the final whistle blew, the Tigers were champions once again. Just 2 years later, they did it again. The 2002 team wasn't expected to make a run just 6 wins in the regular season, but something caught fire in those playoffs. Quarterback Brad Lanham threw 3 touchdown passes in the championship win over Colbert County, and suddenly, Brewton was celebrating another title. The very next year, the 2003 squad set a school record 556 points in a single season, a blur of touchdowns and Friday night fireworks. All told, the Tigers won 10 games or more in 9 of the decade's 10 seasons and went unbeaten twice in 2004 and 2008. That same year, the town paused to celebrate Zeke's 30th anniversary as team manager, a reminder that the soul of this place isn't just in the players or the coaches, but in the folks who've carried the water and the weight along the way. And in 2008, T.R. Miller stamped its dominance on the Battle of Murder Creek, once more a 55-0 win over Neal that echoed all the way to the creek. It was another golden era full of records, rivalries, and the kind of pride that seeps into the soil and stays there. The 2010s came with the feeling that something was changing in Brewton. The wins still came, the lights still burned on Friday nights, but you could sense the closing of a chapter. The decade opened with fireworks, the 2010 Tigers delivering one of the most unforgettable finishes in school history. A last-second Hail Mary, a 2-point conversion, a 36-35 win over Washington County that left fans breathless and reminded everyone that magic still lived in that end zone. By 2013, the Tigers were rolling again, giving Coach Jamie Riggs his final undefeated regular season. One more perfect fall before time began to catch up. 2 years later, in 2015, Miller won 10 games and capped it off with another region championship that felt like a storybook ending. And in a way, it was. After 27 seasons and 293 wins, Coach Riggs stepped away, leaving behind a legacy carved into the red clay and stitched into every jersey that followed. The years that came next were a time of transition, 3 coaches and 4 seasons, each one searching for that familiar spark, that same old Miller heartbeat. And then, in 2019, under new head coach Brent Hubbard, the Tigers found it again. A 6-win regular season turned into a playoff run for the ages, 3 wins, one after another, all the way to the state semifinals. It wasn't just a comeback, it was a reminder that even when the faces change, the fire doesn't. Because in Brewton, football isn't just played, it's passed down. The 2020s began with challenge and change, a decade that tested everyone, even the T.R. Miller Tigers. Through the silence of the pandemic, the empty stands, and the uncertainty of it all, the red and white kept showing up. Because that's what they've always done. Under Coach Brent Hubbard, Miller football found its rhythm again. Tough, disciplined, and proud. In 6 seasons, his teams won with the kind of steadiness that felt like the old days. 3 of his last 4 squads reached double-digit wins. In 2021, T.R. Miller became the first high school in Alabama to reach 700 victories, more wins than any program in state history. A century of football, 100 years of names, moments, and memories etched into that red helmet. In 2024, the Tigers did something that hadn't been done in over a decade, a 12-win, undefeated regular season that felt like the past and future shaking hands. When Coach Hubbard hung up his whistle after the 2024 campaign, another familiar face stepped forward. Former Miller Tiger Ronnie Cottrell, coming home to lead the next generation. And as the lights come on in Brewton once again, you can't help but feel it, that sense that something sacred still lives here. Because at T.R. Miller, the story never really ends. It just keeps getting passed on. One game, one team, one Friday night at a time.